The fire in my cabin had burned down to glowing embers when the knocking started. 3 sharp raps, then silence, then 3 more. I sat up in my chair, the leather-bound book I'd been reading sliding off my lap onto the rough wooden floor. In 23 years of living alone in these Colorado mountains, I'd never had visitors after dark. The nearest town was 15 miles down a treacherous mountain path, and most folks knew better than to travel these trails at night. The knocking came again, more urgent this time. I reached for the shotgun that always rested against the stone fireplace, my bare feet silent on the cold planks as I approached the heavy oak door. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice carrying the authority of a man who'd learned not to trust easily. "Please, mister," came a small voice, barely audible through the thick wood. "We need help. We got nowhere else to go." I paused, my hand on the iron latch. The voice belonged to a child, that much was certain. But children didn't wander these mountains alone, especially not in the dead of winter. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Bandits sometimes use children as bait, counting on a man's natural instinct to help the helpless. "How many of you are there?" I asked, keeping my weapon ready. "4 of us, sir, just boys. We ain't armed and we ain't looking for trouble. We just need somewhere warm to sleep." Something in the voice, a quality of desperation mixed with stubborn dignity, made me slowly pull back the bolt. I cracked the door open just enough to peer out into the moonlit clearing around my cabin. What I saw nearly made me drop my shotgun. 4 boys stood on my porch, their ages ranging from what looked like 6 to maybe 14. Their clothes were little more than rags, patched and repatched until the original fabric was barely visible. But it was their faces that struck me most. These weren't the soft, rounded faces of children who'd known comfort and safety. These were the gaunt, hollow-eyed faces of survivors, old beyond their years and marked by hardships no child should ever endure. The oldest boy, a thin youngster with sandy hair that hung in his eyes, stepped forward. "Mister, I know how this must look. 4 strange boys showing up at your door in the middle of nowhere. But we've been walking for 3 days, and the little ones can't go much further. We ain't asking for much. Just a place by your fire till morning." I looked past him at the other 3. 2 appeared to be twins, maybe 8 years old, with matching mops of dark hair and identical expressions of exhausted hope. The youngest couldn't have been more than 6, and he was swaying on his feet with fatigue. "Where'd you boys come from?" I asked, still not opening the door fully. The older boy's jaw tightened. "The Grayson Home for Boys, down in Denver. But we ain't going back there, mister. Not ever. I'd heard of the Grayson Home. Everyone in Colorado had. It was supposed to be a charitable institution, a place where orphaned and abandoned children could find shelter and education. But there had been whispers over the years, dark rumors about the man who ran it and what really went on behind those high stone walls." "You boys run away?" "Yes, sir," the boy said without shame. "And we'll keep running as long as we have to. We'd rather freeze to death on this mountain than spend another day in that place." The conviction in his voice told me everything I needed to know. These children weren't running toward adventure or trying to shirk responsibility. They were running from something genuinely terrible. I opened the door wider. "Come in, then. Get yourselves by the fire." The relief on their faces was almost painful to watch. They filed past me silently, their bare feet making no sound on my floor. I noticed that the older boy stayed behind the others, positioning himself between them and me, even now ready to protect his younger companions. "Sit down," I said, gesturing toward the stone hearth, where the embers still glowed warm. "I'll build up the fire and see what I can find for you to eat." As I worked to revive the flames, I studied the boys more carefully. They huddled together like a pack of young wolves, instinctively seeking comfort and safety in proximity to each other. The twins leaned against each other, their eyes already heavy with the promise of warmth and safety. The youngest had curled up like a puppy, his thumb in his mouth despite his obvious efforts to appear grown up. But it was the oldest who drew my attention. Even exhausted and half-starved, he remained alert, watching me with intelligent green eyes that missed nothing. This was their leader, the one who had somehow managed to get 4 children across 200 miles of dangerous territory in the dead of winter. "What's your name, son?" I asked as I ladled leftover stew into bowls. "Tom," he replied. "Tom Fletcher. These are the Morrison twins, Jack and Billy, and the little one is Samuel. We call him Sammy." "I'm Jacob Matthews," I said, handing him a bowl of the warm stew. "You can call me Jake." Tom accepted the food gratefully, but didn't begin eating until the other boys had been served. I watched him carefully portion out the bread I'd brought, making sure the younger ones got the larger pieces. Everything about his behavior spoke of someone who'd taken on responsibilities far beyond his years. "Tom," I said carefully, "what happened at the Grayson home that made you boys risk your lives to get away?" Tom's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He glanced at the other boys, then back at me. "You wouldn't believe us if we told you, mister. Adults never do. Try me." For a long moment, Tom studied my face, as if trying to determine whether I could be trusted with whatever terrible secret they carried. Finally, he reached into his ragged shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper, stained with what looked like dried blood. "We found this in Mr. Grayson's office," he said quietly. "We weren't supposed to be there, but Sammy was sick and we were looking for medicine. We heard voices and hid behind the desk. That's when we heard them talking about the sale." "What sale?" I asked, though something cold was already settling in my stomach. Tom unfolded the paper with shaking hands. "The sale of children, Mr. Jake. Mr. Grayson ain't running no orphanage. He's running a business. Boys get sold to work in mines, girls get sold to other places. And the ones who cause trouble or try to tell someone," he gestured to the dark stains on the paper, "they don't get sold at all." I took the letter from his trembling hands, my own growing cold, as I read the neat handwriting that detailed prices, ages, and descriptions of children as if they were livestock. At the bottom, in red ink that I now realized wasn't ink at all, was a list of names with the word "disposed" written next to each one. "Sweet Mary," I whispered, the full horror of what these boys had discovered hitting me like a physical blow. "We couldn't save the others," Tom said, his voice breaking with the weight of guilt no 14-year-old should carry. "But we couldn't stay, knowing what we knew. So we took Sammy and the twins and we ran. We've been running for 5 days, hiding during the day, walking at night. I looked at these 4 brave children who had risked everything to escape unimaginable evil, and I felt something shift in my chest. For 23 years, I'd lived alone on this mountain, telling myself I preferred solitude. But sitting here in the firelight, watching these boys slowly relax as warmth and food worked their magic, I realized how empty my life had become. "Well," I said, my voice rougher than I intended, "you boys aren't running anymore. This is where your journey ends." Tom tensed, his protective instincts flaring. "Mr. Jake, you can't send us back. Please, I'm begging you." "I'm not sending you back, son," I said firmly. "I'm saying you're home." The silence that followed was profound. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me, with a mixture of hope and disbelief so intense it was almost painful to witness. "You mean it?" whispered one of the twins. "I mean it," I replied. "This mountain's got plenty of room for 4 more. But there'll be rules and there'll be work. Think you boys can handle that?" Tom straightened his shoulders, and for a moment I could see the man he would become. "Yes, sir. We can handle anything as long as we're together." Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees, but inside my cabin 4 lost boys had finally found their way home. As I watched them settle down by the fire, finally allowing themselves to truly rest, I realized that sometimes the most important moments in life come knocking on your door at midnight, desperate and broken and asking for nothing more than a chance. The blood-stained letter had changed everything, but not in the way those evil men had intended. Instead of documenting destruction, it had become the catalyst for something beautiful. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, courage, and the simple human need to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will touch your heart and inspire your soul. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful midnight when 4 desperate boys appeared at my door, and my cabin had transformed from a solitary retreat into something I'd never expected it could be, a home filled with life, laughter, and the comfortable chaos that comes with children. The boys had adapted to mountain life with remarkable resilience. Tom had proven himself invaluable in helping me with the daily tasks that came with surviving in the wilderness. He learned to set snares for rabbits, to read the weather signs in the clouds, and to identify which plants were safe to eat. More importantly, he'd begun to relax, the constant tension of someone always looking over his shoulder slowly melting away as he realized he truly was safe. The twins, Jack and Billy, had taken to mountain life like they'd been born to it. They were natural climbers, scampering up rocks and trees with the fearlessness of youth. I'd taught them to fish in the stream that ran behind the cabin, and they'd turned it into a competition, each trying to catch more than the other. Their laughter echoed through the valley, a sound I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Little Sammy had perhaps changed the most. The hollow-eyed, silent child who'd arrived that night had blossomed into a curious, talkative 6-year-old who followed me everywhere, asking endless questions about everything, from why snow was white to how birds knew which direction to fly. He'd appointed himself my official helper, and his earnest attempts to assist with even the simplest tasks never failed to bring a smile to my face. But it was the evening of the 21st day that truly tested our newfound family. I was teaching Tom how to properly sharpen an axe when we heard the horses. The sound of multiple riders approaching at speed was unmistakable, and Tom's face went white as mountain snow. "They found us," he whispered, his hand instinctively moving to shield the younger boys who were playing nearby. Through the cabin window, I could see a group of 6 men dismounting in my yard. Leading them was a tall, imposing figure in a black coat and silver vest, a man whose very presence seemed to radiate authority and menace. Even from a distance, I could tell this was someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and force. "Boys," I said quietly, "go to the back room and stay there until I call for you." "But Mr. Jake," Tom protested. "If that's Mr. Grayson, he won't just take no for an answer. He's got the law on his side. He's got papers that say we belong to him." I looked at this brave boy who'd already shown more courage than most grown men ever would, and I felt a fierce protectiveness rise in my chest. "Tom, son, there are different kinds of law. There's the law written on paper, and there's the law written in a man's heart. Sometimes they don't agree, and when that happens, a man has to choose which one he's going to follow." A heavy knock echoed through the cabin, followed by a voice that carried the smooth confidence of someone used to getting his way. "Mr. Matthews, I am Josiah Grayson, director of the Grayson Home for Boys. I believe you have something that belongs to me." I opened the door to find myself face to face with a man who looked exactly like what he was. A predator in gentleman's clothing. His smile was perfectly practiced, his manners impeccable, but his eyes were cold as winter ice. Behind him stood 5 other men, all armed, all wearing the look of men who enjoyed their work a little too much. "Mr. Grayson," I said, making no move to invite him in, "what brings you to my mountain?" "I think you know very well what brings me here," Grayson replied, his smile never wavering. 4 of my boys ran away from the home 3 weeks ago. I have reason to believe they may have sought shelter here. And what makes you think that? Grayson's eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign that his patience wasn't infinite. "Mr. Matthews, let's not play games. These mountains are treacherous, especially in winter. 4 young boys couldn't possibly survive out here on their own. Logic dictates they found shelter somewhere, and your cabin is the only habitation within 50 miles of where they were last seen. Assuming these boys did make it to my cabin," I said carefully, "what exactly would you want with them? From what I understand, children who run away from your establishment aren't exactly treated with kindness when they're returned." For just a moment, Grayson's mask slipped, and I caught a glimpse of the monster beneath the polished exterior. "Mr. Matthews, those boys are my legal responsibility. I have documentation from the territorial government giving me full authority over their welfare. They belong to the institution, and by extension, they belong to me. Children don't belong to anyone, I said firmly. They're not property to be owned and traded. Grayson laughed, a sound like breaking glass. How refreshingly naive. Mr. Matthews, those boys have been designated as wards of the state and placed in my care. If you're harboring them, you're guilty of kidnapping. I have a federal marshal with me who would be more than happy to place you under arrest. One of the men behind Grayson stepped forward, a tin star gleaming on his vest. But something about his bearing, the way he carried himself, told me he was no lawman. He had the look of a hired gun, the kind of man who'd pin on any badge if the price was right. Now, Grayson continued, I'm prepared to be reasonable. Return my boys, and we'll say no more about this unfortunate incident. Refuse, and you'll find yourself facing federal charges. I studied the faces of the men arrayed before me, reading the casual cruelty in their eyes, the complete lack of concern for the welfare of 4 children who'd risked everything to escape them. These weren't men who saw children as human beings deserving of protection and care. They saw them as commodities, as sources of profit and power. I appreciate you riding all this way, I said finally, but I'm afraid you've wasted your time. There are no children here. Grayson's smile disappeared entirely. Mr. Matthews, I'm going to give you one more chance to reconsider. I know they're here. My tracker followed their trail right to your door. Return them now or face the consequences. And I'm telling you there are no children here, I repeated, my hand moving casually to rest on the handle of the Colt 45 that never left my side. But you're welcome to look around if you don't believe me. What followed was a tense game of cat and mouse as Grayson's men searched my cabin and the surrounding area. I'd hidden the boys in a root cellar I dug years ago for food storage, accessible only through a carefully concealed trapdoor in the kitchen floor. They could have torn my cabin apart board by board and never found that hiding place. After an hour of fruitless searching, Grayson's frustration was beginning to show. This isn't over, Matthews, he said, his cultured voice taking on a harder edge. I'll be back, and when I return, I'll have a proper warrant and enough men to turn this entire mountain upside down. You do that? I replied calmly. And when you come back, I'll still tell you the same thing. There are no children here. As I watched them ride away, I felt Tom emerge from the cellar behind me, followed by the other boys. Mr. Jake, Tom said quietly. He meant what he said. He'll be back, and next time he might bring enough men to... Tom, I interrupted, placing my hand on his shoulder, that man can bring an army up this mountain, and my answer will still be the same. You boys aren't going back to that place. Not ever. But what if he really does have the law on his side? Jack asked, his young voice trembling with worry. I knelt down so I could look all 4 boys in the eyes. Boys, let me tell you something about the law. Real law, true justice, isn't about papers and official stamps. It's about doing what's right even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And what's right is keeping you boys safe, no matter what it costs me. Little Sammy threw his arms around my neck, and I felt something settle in my chest that I'd never experienced before. This was what it meant to have a family, to have people who depended on you and whom you'd protect with your last breath. That night, as the boys slept safely in their beds, I sat by the window with my rifle across my knees, watching the mountain trails for any sign of returning riders. Grayson would be back, that much was certain. But when he came, he'd find that some things in this world were worth fighting for. And 4 brave boys who'd risked everything for freedom were definitely among them. The blood-stained letter remained hidden in my desk, evidence of horrors that demanded justice. But justice would come in its own time. For now, my job was simpler. Keep 4 children safe and show them what it meant to be part of a real family. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of courage and family. Hit that subscribe button to never miss our incredible true tales. 2 months had passed since Grayson's visit, and I'd begun to hope that perhaps he'd given up his pursuit. The boys had settled into a rhythm of mountain life that felt as natural as breathing. We'd expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom for them, and enlarging the main room to accommodate our growing family. Tom had proven himself handy with tools, and together we'd built furniture and improved the homestead in ways I'd never bothered with when I lived alone. But on a crisp morning in early spring, when the snow was beginning to melt and reveal the first hints of green beneath, our peaceful existence was shattered by the sound I'd been dreading: horses. Many of them approaching through the mountain pass. This time, Grayson hadn't come with just 5 men. Through my spyglass, I counted at least 20 riders, armed and spreading out to surround the cabin. Among them, I recognized not just hired guns, but also men wearing the uniforms of territorial marshals. Grayson had kept his promise and returned with what appeared to be legitimate legal authority. "Tom," I called quietly, "gather the boys and get them to the cellar. This is going to be different from last time." But Tom stood his ground, his young face set with determination. "No, Mr. Jake, we're not hiding this time. We're tired of running, tired of being afraid. If they're going to take us, they'll have to do it in the open, where everyone can see what kind of men they really are." Before I could argue, the other boys had joined him, forming a line across my front porch with a courage that took my breath away. Jack and Billy, the twins who'd learned to laugh again in these mountains. Little Sammy, who'd grown 2 inches and gained enough confidence to argue with boys twice his size. And Tom, the leader who'd somehow guided them all to safety across hundreds of miles of dangerous territory. "Boys," I said, my voice rough with emotion, "you don't have to do this. Let me handle it." "We're a family," Tom said simply. "Families stick together." The riders had formed a complete circle around the cabin now, cutting off any possibility of escape. Grayson dismounted and approached the porch, flanked by 2 men wearing federal marshal badges. This time his smile was one of complete triumph. "Mr. Matthews," he called out, "as you can see, I've returned with proper legal authority. These gentlemen represent the territorial government, and they have a warrant for the return of 4 fugitive miners who've been illegally harbored on your property." One of the marshals, a heavy-set man with graying hair, stepped forward and unfolded an official-looking document. "Jacob Matthews, by the authority of the territorial government, you are ordered to surrender the 4 miners known as Thomas Fletcher, Jack Morrison, Billy Morrison, and Samuel Crenshaw to the custody of Mr. Josiah Grayson, their legal guardian." I looked at the warrant, noting the official seals and signatures. On the surface, it appeared legitimate, but something about the marshals bothered me. Real federal marshals didn't usually travel in groups of 20, and they certainly didn't surround homesteads like military operations. "Before I comply with any legal orders," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I'd like to see some proper identification from these marshals. And I'd like to know exactly what crimes these boys are supposed to have committed that warrant this kind of military response." The heavy-set marshal's face reddened. "Mr. Matthews, you're in no position to make demands. These boys are property of the territorial government, placed in Mr. Grayson's care for their own welfare." "Property," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "Did you just refer to 4 American children as property?" A new voice cut through the tension, coming from the ridge above the cabin. "That's an interesting choice of words, Marshal." "Very interesting indeed." Everyone turned to see a lone rider emerging from the tree line, moving down the slope with the easy confidence of someone completely unafraid of the 20 armed men below. As he drew closer, I could see he was a tall, lean man with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. Most importantly, the badge on his vest caught the morning sunlight, and unlike the tin stars worn by Grayson's marshals, this one was clearly genuine. "Judge William Harrison," the newcomer announced as he reached the edge of the clearing. "Federal Circuit Judge for the Colorado Territory. And unless I'm very much mistaken, I'm looking at a group of men impersonating federal officers." The effect of his words was immediate and dramatic. Several of Grayson's hired guns shifted nervously in their saddles, while the fake marshals exchanged glances that spoke of rising panic. "Your Honor," Grayson said, his smooth voice showing the first real cracks I'd heard, "I'm afraid there's been some confusion. These men are legitimate federal marshals with proper warrants for the return of 4 runaway children. Judge Harrison dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and dignified. Is that so? Well, that's curious, because I happen to know both federal marshals assigned to this territory, and neither of them is among your group. In fact, Marshal Thompson is currently in Denver, and Marshal Williams is recovering from a broken leg in Colorado Springs. The heavy-set fake marshal made the mistake of reaching for his gun. He never cleared leather. Judge Harrison's Colt was in his hand and cocked before the other man's weapon had moved an inch. I wouldn't, the judge said calmly. Impersonating a federal officer is a serious crime. Drawing on a real federal judge would make it a capital one. The clearing fell silent except for the wind through the pine trees. Grayson's carefully orchestrated plan was unraveling, and everyone present could see it happening. Now then, Judge Harrison continued, holstering his weapon but keeping his hand near it. Would someone like to explain to me exactly what's going on here? Tom stepped forward, the blood-stained letter clutched in his hand. Your Honor, my name is Tom Fletcher. These are my friends Jack, Billy, and Sammy. We escaped from the Grayson Home for Boys 2 months ago because we discovered something terrible. With remarkable composure for a 14-year-old boy, Tom explained everything. The overheard conversations, the discovery of the letter, the horrifying realization of what the orphanage really was. He spoke clearly and calmly, presenting facts without embellishment, and handed the judge the evidence they'd risked their lives to preserve. Judge Harrison read the letter in complete silence, his face growing darker with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Grayson, with eyes like chips of flint. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, human trafficking, and accessory to murder. Your associates are under arrest for impersonating federal officers and conspiracy." What followed was chaos. Several of Grayson's men tried to run, but Judge Harrison had brought help of his own. Real federal marshals emerged from concealment around the clearing, quickly subduing the fake lawmen and hired guns. Grayson himself seemed to age 10 years in 10 minutes, his facade of respectability crumbling as the weight of his crimes became undeniable. As the prisoners were being secured, Judge Harrison approached our little group on the porch. "Boys," he said gently, "you've been through something no child should ever experience. But I want you to know that your courage in preserving that evidence and speaking the truth today has probably saved dozens of other children from the same fate." "What happens now?" Sammy asked, his small voice barely audible. Judge Harrison knelt down to the boy's level. "Now you get to choose. The territorial government will help place you with proper families, people who'll take care of you the way children should be cared for. Or—" He looked up at me with a slight smile. "If Mr. Matthews is willing, and if it's what you boys want, I can make some legal arrangements that would ensure you never have to be separated again." I felt 4 pairs of eyes turned to me, filled with hope and trust that I'd spent months earning. "Boys," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I've grown mighty fond of having you around. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to be your legal guardian." The answer came not in words, but in 4 sets of arms, wrapping around me in a group hug that nearly knocked me off my feet. 6 months later, the Grayson Home for Boys had been shut down permanently, its director and his associates serving long sentences in the territorial prison. The children who'd been trapped there had been relocated to legitimate institutions, or in many cases, adopted by families who actually wanted them. As for us, we'd become an official family in the eyes of the law, but we'd been a real family from that first night when 4 desperate boys knocked on my cabin door. The cabin had grown again, expanded to accommodate our needs, and the mountains that had once echoed with only the wind now rang with the sounds of children playing. Learning and growing, Tom had developed into a fine young man, preparing to attend the Territorial University on a scholarship Judge Harrison had helped arrange. The twins had discovered a talent for medicine and spent their free time learning from the doctor in the nearest town. And Sammy had become the mountain's unofficial wildlife expert. able to track and identify every creature that called our high valley home. On quiet evenings, when the boys were asleep and I sat by the fire, reflecting on how much our lives had changed, I often thought about that blood-stained letter that had brought us together. It had been intended as evidence of evil, a record of human cruelty and greed. Instead, it had become the catalyst for something beautiful, the creation of a family bound not by blood, but by choice, courage, and love. Sometimes the most important moments in life come when you least expect them, in the form of desperate children seeking nothing more than safety and a chance to be free. 4 boys had knocked on my cabin door at midnight, carrying a letter that changed everything. But what they'd really brought me was something far more precious, the chance to discover that the heart has room for more love than we ever imagine, and that family is made not by birth, but by the decision to care for one another, no matter what the cost. The mountains still stood tall and proud around our valley, but they no longer sheltered a lonely hermit. They protected a family, bound together by trials survived and love freely given, stronger than any storm the world could send our way. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courage, love, and family. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to never miss our amazing true stories that will touch your heart and inspire your soul. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.